Hey everybody. Thanks for joining us today for our Adobe Premiere Pro webinar hosted by us here at OpenDrives. I am Zack Charney Cohen. I am a systems engineer here at OpenDrives and also a workflow specialist. And today here with us we have Karl Soule from Adobe.
Awesome, thanks for having me. I've been with Adobe for going on about 15 years now, and I'm actually based down here in Hollywood working as a workflow expert on a lot of the same projects you're working on.
Yeah, we definitely do a lot of stuff together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
So
Adobe and OpenDrives enjoy a very close working relationship. We have many customers in common, and also we have some joint ventures together.
Absolutely, absolutely. So why don't you, let's talk a little bit about where we are right now. I love the new facility you guys have. I know you've been here for better part of a year now.
Yeah, gosh, time flies.
So
yeah.
This is a wonderful facility, a demo station at the home offices for OpenDrives in Culver City. And I love these HP machines you guys are running here today.
Thanks. Yeah, so we were very lucky to have some really great partnerships with not only Adobe, but also companies like NVIDIA and Hewlett-Packard. So what we're sitting in, although you can't see it because we're on green screen today, is we're sitting in our demo center, which is kind of a center of excellence, right, if you will. We created this space with the best monitors. You know, our monitors actually are that wide that you're seeing right there. So these are this is all live stuff that we're doing. Karl will be navigating through the project there. So we have, you know, monitors, we have workstations, we have performant networking and switches. We wanted to create this space so people could come in and sometimes even with their own content, get a feel for what it's like to actually work in Adobe Premiere on our storage platform. Right?
Absolutely, yeah.
The tangibility of scrubbing video or just questions about, hey, you know, we work with this and that codec and everybody's format is a little bit different. So, you know, we created this space as an opportunity to bring people in and show them exactly how good it can be.
Absolutely, and this is a real world project here. This is actually an episode of the Netflix series Mindhunter, which is something David Fincher's team has been working on. Season 1 is already up on Netflix. Definitely worth checking out. So this is an actual episode here with the finished timeline is what we're working on here.
Before we go a little bit further, Karl, I just wanted to say to everybody watching, we're going to do Q&A at the end. So as we're talking, there should be the ability in the Zoom webinar to type in your questions. And Sandra, who is our head of marketing, she will be moderating those questions and serving them to us. And we'll be able to answer them as we have time, probably mostly at the end.
Absolutely.
Speaking a little bit more about the workstations, though, as glad as we are to have the Mindhunter project, we'll get into that in a little bit. What are we actually working on, right? So what we have here is both Karl and I are on HP Z6 workstations, and they are running dual processors at 3.6 gigahertz. So one of the things that we see, especially, and I think Adobe would probably agree, is that performance is sort of measured in a holistic sense, ultimately. Everything in your chain, whether it's the workstation that's processing, the processor, the GPU, the network card, the network connection, the switch, the software, the storage, all of that has to be, you have to understand, you know, where your bottleneck is.
Yeah, it's a chain. If you have a weak link, right? that's where you're going to have performance issues.
Yeah, and so, you know, having those fast clocks on the workstations is something that we've seen comes in really handy, especially in Premiere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What we typically recommend, and you know, this is true on both platforms, Windows and Mac, is you're better off having higher clock speeds on the cores. And you know, Premiere is definitely multi-threaded. It takes advantage of multiple cores. But if you have a choice between, you know, a huge number of cores at a slower clock speed or a smaller number of cores at a higher clock speed, you know, Premiere for most things, there are some edge cases, you know, when you're editing Red natively, for example, where additional cores can make a difference. But for the average person who's going to be editing files like ProRes or DNX, you know, somewhere around 8 to 10 cores is usually more than enough for what you're working on, and so the extra clock speed makes a difference.
Totally. And so we're actually running Windows 10 today, and I know that seems maybe less common in the media and entertainment space, but we actually are seeing a really big resurgence of Windows as well, and once you're in the application, you know,
It's pretty much the same
right?
regardless.
Especially with Premiere on Mac and Windows, it's going to be the same feel. And actually, Windows 10 for us, we find is an extremely performant operating system. So one of the things that we do here in the demo center is we show what sort of the fastest connection you can have to the machine is, right?
Absolutely.
So we actually have these Z6 connected right now via 40 gig Ethernet directly to our, what we call our Summit, which is our hybrid platform, which is a combination. So imagine in our server room, we have a 4U unit that has spinning disk and NVMe and RAM. And we'll talk a little bit as we go along about how we leverage all of those technologies together for both capacity and performance.
From an editorial standpoint, it just means, first off, just incredible scrubbability on the timeline. Now, it's something that you just have to come and experience it yourself on the webinar because of some of the streaming.
H.264 compression over the web, we get you, this is the second, we like to say this is the second best experience, second to actually coming in and seeing it for yourself.
But sitting here, it's like just the ability to kind of quickly scrub through a timeline and say, wait a minute, I want to check a title, and be able to just kind of see that as a quick glimpse, because we're scrubbing through so many frames on the timeline. We really can very quickly jump around and see what we're looking for and find what we need.
I will like to say, while we are connecting 40 gig, that is not entirely necessary.
No.
We do it to kind of show off what we can do, right? We actually have some workstations that are connected via 100 gig directly to the workstation as well. So we like to say it's like the fastest, it's the fastest edit suite in Hollywood. But we also have Macs here, 10 gig connected, 25 gig connected. You're going to get similar type of performance as long as whatever codec you're working with can fit down that pipe. This is what you should expect to see.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think on a lot of the actual jobs we've worked on, 10 gig is more of the standard.
Very common. Optical Ethernet is always sort of our best practices. We say you immediately pay a performance tax for copper, but if you have copper, it's not the end of the world, right? Especially if you're doing mostly offline editing or sort of intermediate editing where you're doing ProRes or Cineform or something like that, right?
Absolutely.
As long as you can fit it over that pipe, then you're fine.
And what people refer to as offline editing now, it kind of cracks me up because in the past, it's like your deliverable might be 2K and your offline files might be half that. This project here, this was all shot on Red cameras, or for the most part shot on Red cameras at a mix of everything from 8K, 6K, 5K. And what you end up with is an offline file that's actually 2.3K ProRes is what ends up being the offline file to edit with.
Yeah.
Partially because Fincher always likes to shoot a little bit of overscan so that he has the ability to, in post-production, they can kind of nudge the frame left, right, up or down just a touch to get the exact shot they want.
And do extensive stabilization.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's one of the most impressive things I think that we've seen, Billy and Tyler do.
Yeah.
But really, I think it's worth mentioning, actually, that what we're seeing here is a project, it's a full episode of Mindhunter, and they actually do use extensively nested comps in After Effects. So we also actually have After Effects. And what you're seeing here is the latest version. Mm-hmm. We didn't mention that yet.
No, so this is the 2019 release. This just came out in October of 2018 is when the CC 2019 release just happened. So this is a brand new version. And at the end of our webinar, we're actually going to talk about some of the new features that have just been added to Premiere.
Totally. And I think it's worth mentioning a little bit about how we got here and why we know how the Fincher crew works. And Adobe is one of the longest standing relationships from OpenDrives, if not the longest standing. One of our founding members of our company was actually David Fincher's chief engineer. And on the downslope of Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, in the research phase for how Gone Girl was going to happen, they were looking around for, Fincher likes to push the envelope, right?
Yeah.
Shooting on Red cameras, editing in Premiere. What's the latest, greatest stuff we can do? How can we reduce workflow steps?
Just about everything is within his facility. So it's one of those things that you have people doing After Effects comps down the hall from editorial, and it's about bringing all of that as close together as possible.
That is actually a very good point. Being able to have your VFX artists work in the same facility on the same shared storage without having to stand up new shared storage for your color bay and new shared storage for your VFX artist and new shared storage for your editor. So in the research phase for Gone Girl and trying to figure out how they were going to get all that to work together, they were looking around, and in the marketplace, there really weren't any solutions that were focused on media. There were plenty of shared storage solutions for solving general IT problems like databases and home directories and such. But when it came to playing back video, especially even 2K video or 4K, 4K video at that time, right, was a very difficult thing, and still is to this day if your solution isn't tailored for it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And specifically with Premiere Pro, one of the challenges that we have is Premiere really likes to touch every file that is within the project when you go to load the project for the first time. And on top of that, we also generate certain helper files because Premiere is compatible with just about any file format out there. Some files play nicer than others, and in cases like an H.264 file or an MPEG file, a lot of cameras shoot in these formats, and we will go through and do a little bit of analysis ahead of time and build a little helper file to help us get better scrubbing and better performance. So we can have just a lot of files within a given project, and that's where having really, really fast storage comes in handy.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we were seeing at the beginning in the Gone Girl project, which was at Adobe Premiere, I don't think we said that. That was one of our first collaborations. We were noticing that projects were, once you start building out your project and you start putting more and more assets in there, just as a side note, the project that we're using today is 77,000 assets, which is actually even more than we had on this individual reels of Deadpool and in Gone Girl, I think almost entirely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's an incredible amount of assets, right? So when you go to open like a reel of a movie, on the old storage, before we implemented OpenDrives for the film, it was taking up to 18 minutes to open a single reel of Gone Girl. And so we looked at this Adobe Premiere Pro project open. What happens, right, during a Premiere Pro project open? You got to touch every actual asset to make sure that the file path is good, right? You want to make sure that the assets that you're working with are there. Then you need to load in the CFA and the peak files, right?
Right, the helper files.
Right, exactly. And if those don't exist, then you have to generate them. So one of the things that we looked at was, okay, what happens during that file system traversal to touch the file? What happens for, which CFA files and which peak files need to be created for what different assets, and when do those need to be requested, right? And so looking at this code level analysis of the requests that were coming to the storage, from an OpenDrives perspective, we said, okay, we can metagame this, right? If that's what Adobe needs to go faster, it's asking for it, but this other storage isn't doing it, so we'll just be the storage that does it. And so we generated a lot of what we call prefetching and precaching algorithms. So what ends up happening is 96% of the time in an NLE environment, after all the tuning we did in our engineering, 96% of the time when you're scrubbing through the timeline or when you do a project open, but by the time your workstation requests the file from our storage, we have already elevated, we've lifted it off of the spinning disk into that NVMe layer or that RAM layer, like I was talking about, how we leverage those different components. Because what we want is, in our architecture, we aim to abstract you away from the performance bottlenecks of whatever your slowest piece of storage is. So in our hybrid, which is what most of our joint customers use for Premiere editing, again, we want you to be pulling files as much as possible out of that shared NVMe layer. And one of the things we're going to talk about as well, which I also have up here on my screen, I'll zoom in on that, is you can see here that my media cache file location is set to HPremiere, and my media cache database location is set to HPremiere. Well, okay, maybe that's not very exciting. What does that mean? Well, as it turns out, that location is actually not local. We are caching to the shared storage, which Karl may have a little piece about in a second.
Yeah, absolutely. To go back to what Zach was just saying, just about all of this abstraction and the different layers, just from an editorial standpoint, it just makes everything faster. It's one of those things that when it comes down to it, you just want to be able to get into the project quicker. You want to be able to scrub the project quicker, and everything OpenDrives does just enables that much better. When we talk about these helper files, this is part of what is in these locations that we have on screen here of the media cache database. So we kind of keep track under the hood as to where all of these helper files are. Normally, in a workflow that doesn't involve OpenDrives, we recommend keeping these on local fast storage. So a lot of people end up investing in like SSDs on a workstation by workstation basis. And even with that, because each editor has their own copy of these media cache files, the very first time you open up a project with new media on a new system, it has to rebuild these files. So typical workflow is the assistant editor brings in dailies on their machine, the media cache gets built on their machine, they build out multicams, do whatever is necessary, and then they go over to the lead editor's machine and open up that project before the lead editor gets there in the morning, so that that cache can get built on that machine as well.
I'm only shaking my head because I think I've done that once or twice before when I was working in those facilities.
Yep.
But because this technology exists to be able to do this shared cache, there's a lot of benefits that that brings. And from a workflow perspective, you know, the 30,000-foot view here at OpenDrives, we look at what does an editor do, right? What happens in the content creation process? What files need to be created? When do you need to do offline? When do you need to do online? When do you need to be in DPX? When do you need to be in ProRes? And we look at all the things that we can make faster from our side, from the shared storage side. So in terms of being able to share your cache, when these peak and CFA files get created, they're actually created by the software in such a way that they can be shared if your storage can support it, which means a couple things. You only have to generate the files once, and you only have to store them once if everybody can access the same shared location. So as I have here on H Premiere, you can see that I have this network share mounted OmniDrive cache, which is the OmniDrive in our technology is a small all-flash piece that is separate from the spinning disks and separate from the additional flash that's in there as the prefetch layer. So we actually have a small all-flash array inside the hybrid, and that's where we store all these peak and CFA files. So actually Karl's workstation is also mounted up, and he is setting his cache location to the same spot. So what this means is, if we are working with the same media, which we are in this case, the first person that opens up the project and generates the cache files for that project or those media assets, those cache files never have to be created again. So if I were in a facility, maybe in a facility you have a situation where you're doing more short form content and people aren't necessarily working with the same media, you'll say, okay, that doesn't affect me. Well, it does. Because logistically speaking, if I'm working in a bay, right? And then, oh crap, this is the 4K bay. It has some special playout card in it that somebody else needs, and I need to get up and I need to go to the other room and you know, logistically shuffle around. When I get up and I go to another workstation that's also set to the, are we still on? Oh yeah, we're good. So when I go, we had a little monitor go out.
Yeah.
We're looking around going, are we still broadcasting? So when I get up and I go to the other bay, I can immediately start working, right? Because I can double click, open the project, it loads really quick because all those cache files are already created and I don't have to rebuild the cache to start working. And if you're in a facility where you have these longer form projects and you're starting to, you know, think like, oh my gosh, every time I open the project, it's going to take me 10 minutes, then that suddenly becomes like a huge cost savings to your entire facility, right, at a facility scale.
Absolutely. And just to be absolutely clear, from an Adobe support perspective, you know, we typically don't recommend sharing these cache files. OpenDrives has their special kind of secret sauce on how they go through and share these cache files. Yeah, in a lot of cases, you know, if you were to try and share this, share the cache on some traditional storage with, you know, a gigabit Ethernet connection, the problems you would start to see is, you know, somebody in Edit Bay 1 opens up a Premiere project, it has to touch all these cache files on the network, and the person in Edit Bay 3 is suddenly dropping frames and sees a poor performance for their editorial and playback in front of the producer. So
it's a lot of file requests. Yeah. And you know, part of our technology is actually our file system metadata. You know, we don't have a separate metadata network that can get out of sync or anything like crazy like that. And the file system metadata not only stores persistently on disk, but is also in RAM. So those file system level traversals don't touch us at all. Right? Nice. That's like super fast. Another thing that's worth mentioning is, again, going back to this theme of consolidating your IT spend, if NVMe, which is the sort of flash layer that we're using in our hybrid system, to get this kind of performance, you would have to put an NVMe disk in every single workstation, which can get very costly. So why not, instead of doing that, you know, especially when you start to have 10, 40, maybe more workstations, right? 80 workstations that you all suddenly have to put a fast SSD or NVMe drive in. When you can consolidate that spend and have everybody take advantage of a much smaller amount of NVMe at a shared storage level, that's what we aim to provide.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And it's been really successful for the different films, the different projects we've worked on. Gone Girl was really just the start. Obviously, Mindhunter is being edited over at the Fincher offices.
Deadpool, Only the Brave.
Only the Brave, a wonderful firefighter movie edited by Billy Fox, ACE.
I was going to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was our first shared projects deployment, right?
Absolutely, yeah. We actually developed a shared solution, a localized project sharing solution. Actually was developed in concert with OpenDrives and with the help of editors like Billy Fox, working on Only the Brave. They were actually the first one to test project locking functionality in Adobe Premiere Pro. And this is kind of the one thing that Premiere has been missing is, you know, a really intuitive way of allowing for lead editors and assistant editors to work together. And so in version 12, the previous version, you know, this one's got some improvements on some of the workflow, but we shipped a version of it's project locking, and we call it shared projects or a local shared project solution. We're actually going to give you a quick demonstration of how some of this works here. If we can switch over to my screen on the webinar.
And also, while we do that, I'm just getting a note. I don't think I ever actually talked about how quickly we got those load times down.
No, yeah.
So it was taking, right, when we actually deployed OpenDrives and we switched it over to the OpenDrive system for Gone Girl, we actually got that 18-minute load time down to a minute.
Yeah.
And then on that same project, we got it down to 5 seconds.
Yeah.
And then on Deadpool, which had 70,000 assets in the timeline, we had that. That was also, you know, taking a long time because they weren't using OpenDrives, and then we switched it over. And we got down to 75 seconds. And you remember how many visual effects assets there were.
Oh, yeah.
And that was before shared projects. So you actually had to load every single asset in the entire project, and now with shared projects, you actually don't even have to.
Yeah, yeah. This in the past with Premiere Pro, you could only have one project open at a time, and part of what we did as a shared project workflow is enable Premiere to just have multiple projects open at the same time, and this allows you to take a what could be a large project. You know, if you were to take all of the assets for Deadpool, I think it was around 750,000 assets, but you can break that up into smaller chunks. And really kind of divide it up however the editors want to work. You could have, you know, each reel can be a separate project, and you could have multiple reels open at a time. In this case, the project that we're working on here in Mindhunter, the team there uses a lot of scene bins. So as the dailies are coming in, the assistants are placing them in separate bins for each scene. And as opposed to just being a folder within a massive Premiere Pro project, now each of those are actually separate projects on disk. And part of what this enables, I'm just going to zoom in here on my project file to the top here. And what you'll see is there's a metadata column here called Project Locked. And this allows me to see out of all of these different scene bins who has what open. So you'll notice a green lock icon next to scene 13 here. If I scroll down a little bit, you'll see here's another one that I have open. DA offered Frank a deal.
Actually, Karl, can you go ahead and unlock bin 13 for me so I can go ahead and work on it?
Sure. So if I want to go in and actually work on this, I'll zoom back out again.
Since I'm the assistant now. So basically the way we have this set up is where Karl is sort of the lead editor and I'm the assistant, right?
Yep.
So I would be working in some bins, and then Karl has the main project open, and then when I finish my work, I can sort of hand it off to Karl and say, hey, did I do good? Or can I work on another scene? Or do you need me to go back and do more work on that kind of thing?
Absolutely. And so what I can do here is if I need to unlock this project, I could, of course, close it. But if I want to kind of keep an eye on it, and I need to be able to take it back, take ownership back as soon as Zack is done working on what he's working on, all I have to do is down in the lower corner here, there is a little green lock icon, and all I have to do is click that lock icon, turn it red. If there are any changes that I've made, I'd get a save dialog box at that point to just save the latest state of what I'm working on to disk, so that when Zack opens it, he'll get that latest version.
And of course, now I'm on my screen, I'm working on it, so Karl will continue, and I'll be making some cuts here, and then we'll come back and check it out.
Awesome. And basically what happens, if I go back to the main project here, this episode 106 CC 2019 webinar, you can see that each of these bins represents a different project on disk. I can now see that Zack has taken ownership of this. So when I zoom in here, I can see the red lock icon on scene 13. I can see Zack's name here. These names are just something that we set up in preferences ahead of time. So inside of Premiere, under Preferences, Collaboration, there's an area down here where you can choose exactly what you want the names that are going to show up, what they are. I've had people put phone numbers in there so that you know which edit bay to call.
Maybe Slack handles?
Yeah, exactly. Whatever is necessary so that you know who owns what, who is currently editing what at a glance. Makes it very, very easy. The other thing, if I have a project open that is in read-only mode, like Zack currently has scene 13 open, and I can come over here and take a look at this. I see up at the top of the screen here, I can see Zack's name showing up here, and I can also see a lock icon. But even better, if Zack makes a change to this, I'll actually see a little, as soon as he saves that to disk, I'll actually get an instant notification.
So I'll do that now.
There it is. And one of the things that OpenDrives does is it makes that really, really quick. On some storage, it can be 30, 40 seconds. There's kind of a refresh function there. But with OpenDrives, it's an instantaneous thing. As soon as he saves it, I see the refresh icon here. I come in here and choose Refresh Project. And by doing that, let me zoom out first before I do it.
I was going to say, you'll see that I've gone ahead and butchered that cut for sure.
Oh man, yeah, a lot more multicam inside of this I can see, definitely. But yeah, it's an instant process to be able to get those changes, and I know at a glance if there are changes ready to be had. So Zack still currently opens this bin. Zack, I want to go ahead and do my own cut on this.
Yeah,
so.
Let me just save my latest changes. There
Cool.
we go.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead. I can see that there are changes necessary here. Let me go ahead and refresh the project. Very quick. I've got it. And now I'm going to go ahead and click the little lock icon down in the lower left corner. And now I have ownership of this, and I can go ahead and start making changes to this further.
And I'm going to go work on another scene.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a pretty intuitive way of working. In fact, a lot of people compare it to other solutions out there on the market.
Yeah, I mean, if anything that, when you get into these environments where you're using sort of industry standard methodologies with an assistant and a lead, this is exactly what you're looking for, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there's no need to close or open projects. And if I go in, let me see, I see you're working on scene 16 here, so I'm going to go ahead and open that up.
Oh, yeah.
If there is anything going on in here, if I forget that this is a locked project for any reason and I decide I want to try and eliminate something or change something in this project, Premiere is smart enough to just upfront not allow me to make any changes. It's not going to prevent me from saying, you know what, I need copies of these clips in the other scene. I could actually select these clips and move them to another scene without any problems. So I can always pull stuff from a lock bin. I can never actually make changes to this.
And I just sent you some changes. I just made a timeline with those clips you wanted me to string together.
Yeah, let me go ahead and refresh the project here. And there's the timeline you just made. And if I have this timeline open and try and like drag this and move it around or something, it's just not going to let me, and it's actually going to show me here in the sequence tab, there's a lock icon here letting me know that, yep, no, you can't make any changes. So I can't go down a path of, starting to make changes to this and then hit Control S and suddenly get a message saying, oh, wait, this is read only, you've got to make a duplicate, and now you've got to kind of figure out how to merge that together. We let you know up front that there's something that you need to do. If you're going to make a change, you got to make a copy of it and start working on the copy.
So just to reiterate, right, restate some of the things we talked about. Faster project load times, dramatically in some cases. Intelligent caching and truly shared caching, right? Like the ability to actually have all of the workstations that are working on Premiere put their caching location on the shared storage. That is something that we provide that is fairly unique, I guess, according to Karl. And then, just showing how this project sharing works, this industry standard project sharing and locking methodology that is now available, with Only the Brave. We definitely proved it out, and now it's being used across so many of our customer sites.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've got all kinds of projects in the works we can't quite talk about yet. But,
that's true, yeah. We actually are doing another big project, but we'll talk about that maybe next year.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Karl, do you want to maybe do a little IBC review and talk about some of the features that maybe, for those of you that weren't able to go to Amsterdam or maybe didn't see the press releases yet, I think Karl has a little piece about some of the new features that we can expect to see. As a colorist, I'm very excited.
Yeah, absolutely. While we're always working on improved performance, and this release is no different, you're going to see some better performance, particularly with files from like H.264. I'm doing some testing right now with the new GoPro Hero 7 and just seeing better overall performance at higher raster sizes. So things like 4K 60p, we're now seeing even smaller end cameras are starting to support. But one area of focus for us is to make sure that Premiere has the ability to completely tell the story. And even if color work or audio work is always just temporary, it's still something that's important when you're doing screenings to have the best possible workflow, to be able to provide something that is not distracting to the producers, the director that has to do sign off on this before we start doing turnovers. So as far as that's concerned, we have a series of panels that show up over on the right hand side. For color, Lumetri is our kind of essential panel for color. And new in this release is we've added selective color grading tools inside of the curves adjusters. So what this means is I can now do selective grading of different areas without having to do a lot of masking and tracking. So something like this shot here, I might want to boost the saturation of the blinds in this shot. So I can scroll down to these different types of controls here, and here's something called Luma versus saturation. So if I put something right about the midpoint here and then kind of grab and lift this up, you can actually see if I drop it down, the yellow in the blinds goes away. If I bring it up, I can see much more saturation in the blinds. And I'm doing that without affecting much in the rest of the image. It's just boosting the saturation in the brightest parts of the image. So there's all kinds of different controls in here as far as hue versus hue to make color tweaks and adjustments, hue versus saturation where I can lift or adjust the saturation of a specific color. There's even things in here like saturation versus saturation that allow me to, again, do selective things to kind of get the emotional feel of what's going on.
And so much of that is happening now in the edit suite.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that was actually going on for temporary color work for only the Brave, there was actually a little bit of color work done in Lumetri on just about every clip. Just as the editor and director were working together, it was kind of, we can smooth this out a little bit so that it's not distracting. So if you have, a director always wants their vision presented in the best possible light. And even though the final color grading was done by Technicolor, it was really nice to be able to do that.
And just knowing that you've got it.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Knowing that you don't have to, if it's early enough in the project that you don't have to reshoot something, or right.
Exactly.
Just having more tools to be able to refine your vision is.
Exactly. And just as another aside to that, sound is obviously, in getting an audio mix that sounds good and it's not distracting is another big element. Many times the audio that we're working with initially during the edit process is going to be ADR later, but we still need to make it sound as good as possible for the screenings. And we have another panel. I've just switched over to the audio workspace here. This is called the Essential Sound panel. And this allows me to pick and choose whether I'm working on dialogue, music, sound effects, or ambience. So staying in this same shot here, if I just select this as dialogue, this presents me with a series of tools where I can auto-match loudness to a specific level. I can play with things like clarity, add reverb, but even more importantly, I can fix issues very, very quickly. Previous versions of Premiere had a reduced noise function that was using something called adaptive noise reduction. It took a little while to listen to the audio and then reduce the noise shelf over time. We've replaced that with a brand new version that's instantaneous. I'm not going to do it over a webcam and over the streaming that we have here today, but just know the reduced noise is something that we have greatly improved upon. As well, we've added a new function to fix problems called reduce reverb. So this little function here actually goes through and in particular, if you're getting like, slap back from the windows in a shot or something where you're getting a little bit of that reverb in the shot and the room sound is a little bit too hollow, you can check this box and fix it. Now, I'm going to say up front, it's not something that's going to make somebody 50 feet off microphone sound like they're right on the microphone, but it definitely helps in just reducing those types of issues. And again, it's designed to be check a box and use a slider to fix it. Now, part of the beauty of these different essential panels is under the hood, if I turn on this reduce reverb, I can see in the effect controls panel, I can click this edit button and bring up the actual effect that does this work. And from here, I can do things like select a focus on maybe the lower frequencies or the higher frequencies, depending on where that reverb is coming from, and help to reduce it even further. So there's always an advanced function that I can do from the effect controls panel if necessary. Some of the last thing that I really quickly want to touch on is just how motion graphics are handled inside of Premiere. And for that, I'm going to go over to the graphics workspace and bring up the essential graphics panel. There's a lot of different things you can do now dealing with motion graphics inside of Adobe Premiere. It's a new engine that was introduced a couple versions ago. We've seen a bunch of different improvements. If you're working with an After Effects artist to do motion graphics, some fantastic work in here. But the biggest thing that I like to point out is we've done some changes to how we handle vector art. We've made vector graphics a first-class citizen inside of Adobe Premiere now. So if I just come in here and I'm just going to do something not too exciting, just bring up an ellipse on the screen. The old way of doing things, if I were to use the old scale value to showcase this and scale way, way up, you start to see stair-stepping in a vector object. So what we've done to fix that is now over in the effect controls, when you bring in vector art, you'll see a new effect that'll show up here, something called vector motion. And whenever you're working with vector art, if you use the vector motion function to do things like scaling, this becomes more akin to continually rasterizing the vector graphic in After Effects.
That's so cool.
So the stair stepping goes away. We now see a nice smooth curve on the edge here. If you have somebody who's doing artwork design or has a logo and you're planning on doing some kind of crazy zooms with it, just know that vector art is a first-class citizen in Premiere in this new release. So.
Awesome. So just to again restate a little bit.
Sure. Can we get Zack back up on the stand?
Oh yeah, yeah. all of this is, I mean, maybe not the new features. You guys have obviously been working hard on that, but this type of seamless performance that we have and what we're demonstrating here is really possible because of the nature of the relationship that we share.
Absolutely.
As companies, we really work hard to try and provide the best possible Premiere Pro experience that there can be from the OpenDrive side. And I know that, all the latest versions, the Adobe has one of our systems as well. And so
Absolutely.
We're constantly working together to prove out all of the latest builds and all of the newest features and make sure that everything is working and working as well as it can. So.
Absolutely. When we talk about some of these features, like the project loading times, there's Adobe engineering actually working with the OpenDrives engineers to just provide a really seamless solution.
We talk a lot.
We do talk a lot. Yeah,
it's great.
Absolutely.
All good things. So I think with that, or I think we have a question, at least one.
Yeah, we do have a couple questions. They're around project sharing. So from a confirmation standpoint, the question is, so can you confirm that two editors can work in the same project at the same time?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the question is for everybody, if you didn't hear it, can two editors work on the same project at the same time? What Zack and I are showing here right now is we have set up sort of like a master project that both of us have open at the same time.
Right.
From here, we're each diving into individual projects, we've basically, instead of having everything loaded up in a single project, we've got things set up.
James, actually, can you bring up my screen for a second? I'm just going to zoom in on the top and show what we're talking about. So right here, I have EP 106 CC 2019 webinar, parentheses Karl, right? Because Karl's, he's actually the lead editor, so he has the master project open. And just to show you what that looks like from a file system perspective, if I go to the projects folder here, you can see that, where did I do the webinar one? So EP 106 CC 2019 webinar. These are previous versions of the same project that we did for maybe NAB last year or something like that. But so this X Drive on the demo share Mindhunter projects that we've opened up is the exact same PPROJ file. And then Karl had it open first, so he has control over it. And all of the shared projects that are nested inside that are where the other editors can work. So if you want to work on the same project at the same time, you're not actually both modifying the master project at the same time, I guess would be the best way to characterize it.
Yeah, exactly.
One person owns the master project at a time, and one person owns the shared projects, which would be like the nested bins, for lack of a better term, you know, and then you can pass those off to each other.
Yeah, exactly. Both editors start with the same, they start inside the same project, but that project is typically filled with a series of, you know, you want to call them shortcuts or aliases.
So right here you can see all of those are aliases to, if I go into this Adobe Premiere Pro shared projects, that's where all the nested shared projects are.
So we're not suggesting that two people are like editing the same timeline at the same time or anything like that. You know, that's what the locking does, is it prevents two people from jumping into the same portion of the shared project and doing work that would overwrite each other, or things jumping around on the timeline. This is preventative to prevent people from doing that. The first person who double clicks on one of these aliases, they're the owner of that section of the project. And nobody else can make any changes to that until that person releases the lock.
Right. Does that?
So yeah, to follow up on that, just to specify, particularly probably to the master projects, is there a limit to the number of workstations that can be connected to that shared project at the same time?
I don't know of any upward limit.
There's none from our side. That's for sure.
In most cases, what we see. You know, I'm just thinking about different customer bases. I mean, in most cases, you know, this was designed with the idea of around like 10 to 15 editors kind of working in conjunction with each other. That's probably where the majority of the testing has been done, but there's no physical limitation on how many people can have a, you know, a given project open.
Other than however many people you can fit inside your facility.
Yeah, yeah. You definitely have the bandwidth when we're talking about, you know, what OpenDrives provides. So yeah.
So another question we have here is more of an infrastructure kind of question. So what would it look like if you had a centralized office but a remote editor that didn't really have fast internet? Is there any recommendations for connectivity on that?
That's a good question. We do get this sometimes. I mean, realistically, what you can do is, so talk about how shared projects can help. You can actually take a shared projects piece out if they had a proxy media, for example, and then you could reintroduce it later. Now, that workflow is very advanced, and I wouldn't recommend it necessarily without doing some testing first. But theoretically, that person could work remotely on their own system and then come back and reintroduce it into the shared environment. Yeah.
You know, nobody ever takes work home in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Never. You wouldn't do that.
Doesn't
happen. Just to put that in perspective, if I said, you know, I need to leave and go work on, you know, scene 24 or something on my system, you know, I could reveal that project on a Finder level or on an Explorer level, and it is a standalone Premiere Pro project. It doesn't require making another project and then importing a bin or something like that. It actually will just open up and I can begin to work on that. There is another way of potentially working. And this is something for, you know, for smaller numbers of assets and things. There is an Adobe solution to research. It's something called team projects. Team projects would enable somebody to like make a clone of a particular part of the storage, you know, keep it connected fast on a local drive or something for that person on like, if they're going to edit on a laptop, for example. And we could make a copy of one of these shared projects and convert it into a team project for them to work on, and then take the sequence from the team project and merge it back in here. So that might be another option.
There's at least one more that I can think of, which is talking about in-place proxy swap that you guys have.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So at OpenDrives here, we sort of, doing an offline edit is a little bit like, oh, don't do that. Like, it's very complicated. And if you don't have to do that, like, don't, right? Which, because we have actually some of the other projects I have here open on my timeline are actually some 8K red files. But yeah, it's because it's in multicam mode, not actually multicam stuff. But, you know, the ability to actually just drop your files in and start cutting with them is, you know, super. It's just having that tangibility and like being able to edit that way is so great, and it avoids the complicated offline stuff. Now, that being said, Adobe has introduced this is a couple months ago now, maybe even years now, to be able to automatically generate proxy files, which we are not doing here. This is actually 8K red footage directly in the timeline. But what you could do is you could actually set up Media Encoder to create proxy files, which could be extremely, extremely small. But then you start asking yourself, like, okay, do I want to be editing really low-res video remotely from home? Or do I just want to go into the office, you know, and have the actual good experience and the tangibility, right? Because you can't, once you, I'm not saying we can't provide it, but once you put yourself at the mercy of whatever telecom infrastructure is between you and where your media is, nobody can make any performance guarantee, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, at the end of the day, you know, time and time again, we have editors come in here and scrub the timeline, and then we show them some, you know, red footage in the timeline, and they're scrubbing it, and they're playing it back, and they're jumping around in the project, and it is, you know, and it's like you can't get that remote, like, without going to a really low proxy, and then depending, and also your home internet is really not comparable to what you can get from an industrial perspective, right? Unless you have fiber to your house. Maybe you have a lot of money. Maybe you have fiber to your house, which is great. But again, then there's the latency piece, which is when I hit the space bar, how long does it take to traverse all the way down and all the way back to get that? And these are things that we're solving in a local network, you know, things that we look at and we go, man, these milliseconds or these many microseconds isn't fast enough for us locally. Like, we want it to be better. So once you start saying, oh, I hit the space bar and I have to wait like a second or 2 seconds to play, if it plays at all, when you're accessing remotely, it's weird. I mean, the other option is doing so you could have a workstation that is local in your office, and you could remotely control it, which I have done here from time to time when I am continuing to put a project together, maybe for NAB or something, and I'm logged in and I'm just doing, but that's not, again, it's not for playback. That's just for very like structural editing, like technical editing, like, oh, I need to make all these clips 5 seconds and do this reel and string it out, and I don't really need to play it back. But for story editing,
yeah,
I don't know.
We have, there are a couple of technology partners now that are authorized partners to do that type of virtualization, where you're actually kind of dialing into a remote workstation. So that is actually you know, a possible solution. But yeah, the latency of your internet connection can definitely make a difference in how, you know, the perception of it. A lot of editors that I talk to, you know, they want to be able to just stop on a frame, and that's where, you know, any type of sudden hiccup, you know, the kid downstairs is suddenly, you know, downloading a bunch of movies or something. It's like, yeah, you don't know what's going on.
So it's not saying that it's not supported by any means. There's lots of ways to do it, but depending on which way you choose, you're going to be putting yourself at the mercy of some other third party that is not us. So.
All right. Any other questions?